All right, it's 8:20. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Kelly Dubay. I'm with Tetra Tech. I'm the moderator for this session, and with me is Liz Hyatt from Tetra Tech. If you have any technical issues, feel free to just let us know in the chat, and Liz will try to troubleshoot for you. Hopefully everyone will be fine and things will go as smoothly as they did yesterday. Just a quick reminder to please mute yourself if you haven't already, and thank you to those who have. And in order to help with bandwidth, you can keep your cameras off. That usually helps things run smoothly as well. If you have questions for the presenter, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll leave some time at the end of the session and I'll go through them and make sure that Andy sees them. And just a reminder that Andy's here as a volunteer, and we really appreciate his time coming to the forums today and sharing his experience. And that disclaimer that was provided yesterday, that no approach or technology is endorsed by EPA or Pennsylvania DEP. These are strictly presentations about our volunteer guest speakers' experiences. So I guess that's it. I'm going to turn things over to Andy Stottlemyre from Chambersburg, Franklin County, to talk about the evolution of storm sewer utilities in his borough. Thanks so much for being with us today, Andy.
All right, thank you. And thank you to everyone else that has presented. If you're like me in Chambersburg, I walk away with these types of forums and conferences with 2 or 3 pages of notes, just trying to take back, things that you're doing in your respective municipalities to try to, make improvements on our utility here in Chambersburg. So again, thank you very much for all the presenters' information that you've shared yesterday and that you will share today. So as mentioned, my name is Andy Stottlemyre, and I am the Storm Sewer System Manager here in the borough of Chambersburg. Just like to thank DEP and EPA for the opportunity to present on some things that we're doing here in Chambersburg regarding our storm sewer utility, some partnerships that we formed with neighboring townships and municipalities to assist with MS4 permit compliance, as well as our own general MS4 permit compliance here in Chambersburg. So just a few things about Chambersburg. We are unique among towns our size. We own, operate, and maintain our own utilities, including water, sewer, natural gas, electric, and most recently, storm sewer. We are the county seat in Franklin County. We have a population of approximately, I apologize for not advancing the slides. We have a population of approximately 22,000 people. We have been an MS4 permittee since 2004. In fact, we are one of the 2 original MS4 permittees in Franklin County, the other being Antrim Township, located to the south of Chambersburg. And again, we've operated our own storm sewer utility since 2015. I'm going to get into a lot more detail regarding our utility here shortly. But just some important facts about our utility, just to provide a little bit of a knowledge regarding the size of our utility. We have about 76 miles of pipe, about 32 miles of open drainage conveyance, almost 3,000 inlet structures, 137 inlets, and cumulatively about 254 stormwater basins, and that does include surface basins, subsurface, and underground facilities. And all of our stormwater discharges to either the Conacajig Creek or the Falling Spring Branch. In fact, the Falling Spring Branch, just to give you a little bit of history, the Falling Spring Branch is tributary to the Conacajig in downtown Chambersburg, and it's actually the site of where Benjamin Chambers first settled. So it's full of history here in Chambersburg. So just to get into a little bit about our utility. Before we operated under a storm sewer utility, the attention that we gave to our storm sewer system was when problems would occur. For example, if we had a collapse in a storm sewer system, or an old brick inlet structure, the mortar started breaking apart, and we had collapses or failures in our roadways, that's when we would give our storm sewer system attention. We did not have a dedicated funding source like many other municipalities. Our funding for those improvements came from the general fund. But again, we didn't give the utility the appropriate attention that it needed in order to make improvements. I always like to refer to the storm sewer utility as a forgotten utility. It's often installed and then neglected and forgotten about. So to try to help resolve that, back in 2014, our borough manager's office presented a storm sewer utility feasibility report. And in that report, it was basically our reasoning why we needed to create a utility. And first and foremost was the fact that we needed a dedicated funding source in order to accomplish the tasks that we needed to accomplish. Again, that was presented in October of 2014. Our town council voted unanimously in favor of the utility, and that utility went into effect in January of 2015. And at that time, we began collecting a fee of $3 per month, and that fee was based on every sanitary sewer connection that we have in the borough of Chambersburg. A couple important things to note about the fee. It was never intended for that lump sum fee to sustain itself. If you read through our feasibility report, we had always intended to adopt over to a new fee structure that would likely be impervious coverage based. But that $3 per month fee allowed us to get our feet off the ground. It allowed us to kind of jump into the shallow end rather than the deep end. I mean, yeah, it would have been nice back in 2015 to be able to collect $1 million or $1.5 million and do a lot of big projects. But honestly, the more we talked about it, we really didn't have the staff capacity in order to manage the utility and to start out with a budget that high. So again, the lower fee allowed us to make small steps with regard to progress of the utility. I commend our borough manager's office back in 2014, and honestly, that was before I came to the borough. I came in April of 2015 to manage the utility, but when you read through our feasibility report, our manager's office put a lot of thought and foresight into some of the goals that they saw that were necessary in order to make improvements to our utility. And a prime example, the screenshot that you have in front of you now on the right-hand side, under year 5, that's actually where we're at right now. So yeah, we are more than 5 years into the utility. We were set back like many others due to the pandemic. We were poised to make an adjustment to our fee structure in 2020, but our council decided to postpone that until a later date. But again, we are in the process of data collection and finalizing things in order to move into the impervious coverage fee structure. The fact that we knew that the $3 per month fee was not going to sustain itself, that became much more apparent in 2017 and 2018 whenever we had to reapply for our MS4 permit coverage. Along with that, we also had to update our Chesapeake Bay Plan. And that plan for Chambersburg Borough, it's a multi-million-dollar plan. And again, I don't think it needs to be said, but we are located in the Bay watershed. All of our stormwater goes to the Potomac River and ultimately into the Chesapeake Bay. I'd just like to highlight a couple things regarding our Chesapeake Bay pollutant reduction plan. Whenever we were notified that we needed to update our plan, we hired HRG to assist with writing that plan and to updating that plan. Our plan proposes 23 best management practices at 13 different locations, and our net nutrient reduction is about 417,000 pounds per year. I'd like to talk a little bit about our first best management practices that was implemented in 2018. We refer to that project as the Rhodes Drive Reconstruction. And basically what that project involved was about a 530 linear foot long, narrow bioretention basin that runs parallel with Rhodes Drive. We started conceptualizing that plan whenever we realized that there were road failures, there were flooding problems, there was an insufficient storm sewer system in place at the time. So at that time, we started thinking about ideas to, basically improve the roadway. But one of the more important things for me, of course, was to try to implement some stormwater management facilities at the same time. So we started reaching out to the neighboring property owner. They coincidentally had a failing sidewalk as well that ran parallel with Rhodes Drive. So we tried to incorporate their desire to construct a new sidewalk along with our plan to construct the bioretention basin. So again, the bioretention basin was constructed. And the neat thing about that was that before we constructed the basin, all the stormwater from Rhodes Drive and an adjacent church and our public library parking lot, all the stormwater conveyed down to Rhodes Drive into the storm sewer system and was directly discharged into the Falling Spring branch. This project completely disconnected that direct discharge and provided stormwater management. We were also able to rebuild the failing roadway. We were actually able to take a 24-foot wide roadway and reduce it to 18 feet. Main reason we were able to do that is because it is a one-way street. So again, whenever we started going through the planning for the Rhodes Drive project, we started applying for grants. We were able to secure about $225,000 through the Multimodal Transportation Fund. The Rhodes Drive project was one of, I believe, 2 or 3 projects that we lumped into that particular funding source. We also received about $115,000 through the Chesapeake Bay Trust program through the Green Streets, Green Towns, Green Jobs program. And we also secured $50,000 through the Franklin County Dirt and Gravel Low Volume Road Maintenance Program. Rhodes Drive being a one-way street, we conducted a traffic count. It's well under the 500 vehicle per day threshold to be classified as a low volume road. And ultimately, we only had to spend about $22,000 of our capital reserve funds for the project. One important point to note, whenever we did this project, you look at the grand total being about $412,000. The ultimate nutrient reduction that we achieved through this project was a whopping 0.006%. So you may ask yourself, well, Chambersburg Borough, why did you pay $412,000 to receive less than 1% nutrient reduction that went towards your Chesapeake Bay Plan? Well, this particular project was a no-brainer for us. We had a failing roadway. We had flooding problems along the PennDOT highway. The neighboring property owner had a failing sidewalk. So the stars just aligned for us to do this project regardless of the net nutrient reduction that we received. I'd also like to point out the diagram that you see before you now, that's actually on an educational sign next to the new walkway that we constructed. The new walkway was actually relocated to within the interior of the site, closer to the stream, and it now serves as more of a nature trail. And this Rhodes Drive project was actually the project location before we started construction for a Shippensburg University master's degree student, which was really cool to be involved with her and for the work that she completed and ultimately received her master's degree through Shippensburg University. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about some intergovernmental agreements that we have with adjacent municipalities. Whenever we started talking about implementing a utility, our town council has always been very proactive with regard to providing assistance to other municipalities if and when necessary. We provide assistance with a lot of our other utilities, and storm sewer was the same. So again, in 2017, when we received our letter from DEP indicating that we needed to renew our MS4 permit, we also had to update our Chesapeake Bay Plan. We had 6 or 7 other municipalities that received that same letter, but indicating that they needed to now apply for a new MS4 permit. When that happened, we sat down with, I believe, four other municipalities, 2 of which did sign on to work with us. And those municipalities are Hamilton Township and St. Thomas Townships. So if you're looking at the map, this is the urbanized area map for our area. The yellowish area that I'm outlining here with the cursor, that's the entire municipal boundary for the borough of Chambersburg. Our entire municipal limits has been determined to be urbanized. Located directly to the west of us is Hamilton Township. And then directly to the west of Hamilton Township is St. Thomas Township. It's important to note that while the entire municipal limits of the borough is urbanized, there's only isolated areas for Hamilton and St. Thomas that are urbanized. And while we talked about this in great depth when we first started meeting with them, and it sounded like it would be a good thing for those areas to be fairly small urbanized areas, but when we started implementing our Chesapeake Bay Plan, we found that that was, in a sense, problematic because of BMP locations. So the services that we provide to those municipalities, we prepare their MS4 annual reports, we conduct public education and outreach, as well as public involvement participation. We do provide some level of code enforcement whenever necessary. We have developed and implemented an operation and maintenance program for their township facilities, and we've also developed and implemented training programs for township employees to ensure the prevention of pollutants at their municipal facilities. When we started meeting with other townships to discuss the possibility of working, collaboratively, we tried to point out to them that we felt as though we could provide this assistance at a lower cost than an engineering firm. And just looking back through some of our financial statements, I found last week that we charged those townships about $600 in both 2019 and 2020. So cumulatively in 2019, 2020, Hamilton and St. Thomas both paid us a grand total of $6,600. So I feel as though we're providing the services that we're providing at a fairly low cost, which benefits them tremendously. So I'd just like to provide a couple milestones that we've achieved. These certainly aren't all the milestones, but some of the bigger accomplishments that we've made. So again, in 2014, that's when our feasibility report was presented to our town council. The utility went into effect in 2015. That's when we started charging the $3 per month fee. And again, that fee was based on all sanitary sewer connections in the borough. In 2016, we promoted a part-time GIS technician to full-time. And that was a big deal for us because in Chambersburg, our engineering department gets GPS data on all utilities that go in the ground, whether it's part of public development on our properties or in our roadways, or whether it's as a result of subdivision and land development. So promoting him to full-time, again, was a big deal. He's going out on a, I'd say, daily basis, getting updated shots on different utilities. He gets shots on stormwater pipes, inlets, underground facilities, above ground facilities, and he's even getting like footprint data on like amended soil areas that we have going in as part of land development. In 2017, our fee went from $3 a month to $4 a month. In 2018, we started data collection in order to prepare for changing over to our impervious coverage fee. In particular, we hired a contractor to come in and get updated aerial photography. In 2018, we also finalized our agreement with Hamilton Township. Also in 2018, we renewed our MS4 permit and received acknowledgement from DEP regarding our updated Chesapeake Bay Plan. In 2019, we hired a part-time inspector. We also finalized our agreement with St. Thomas Township. And again, in preparation for changing over to our impervious fee structure, we established a stakeholder advisory committee, and we held 7 stakeholder meetings between the months of February and August of 2019. I'm going to get into more detail about that here shortly. 2020, we were able to promote our part-time inspector to full-time. In 2021, here this year, our fee did go from $4 per month to $5 per month. And as mentioned, when I was talking about our feasibility report, our plan, again, it was kind of set back by the pandemic, but our plan is for the ERU-based fee structure to be presented to council at some point here in the future this year, with the intent of changing over to that new fee structure sometime next year. So in 2018, again, we started the data collection for our fee structure. The screenshot that you have before you now is of the Wilson College area, which is located to the north of town. And you see here, all the different impervious coverage surfaces are indicated by a different color. I'm amazed at the accuracy of our aerial mapping. We have found a few minor flaws, but in general, it's very, very accurate, and we're very happy with the end product of this project. So regarding our stakeholder committee, there was a lot of discussion about who we wanted to ask, and ultimately we found as though it was extremely beneficial to have a very diverse committee. And by diverse, I'm referring to the organizations that they represent. For example, we had the YMCA director serve, 2 borough council members, 2 developers, 2 landlords of various properties throughout Chambersburg. We had King Street Church represented. We had a representative from the hotel and restaurant industry. We had our hospital represented. We had our school district, our Franklin County Planning Department, as well as Wilson College, all involved in our stakeholder committee. Again, they met 7 consecutive times from February through August of 2019. So our stakeholder advisory committee, there was a lot of discussion about our utility, and they were basically tasked with analyzing everything that is involved with a public utility. For example, capital improvements, maintenance needs, staffing needs, equipment needs, and the next couple bulleted points that I want to discuss are some of the highlights of what they discussed over the course of their 7 meetings. They saw a real need to assess and clean the pipe system. One important point about this slide, the dates are not necessarily accurate because, again, we had forecasted that we were going to implement the utility back in 2020. That has not happened yet, but the intent is for it to be implemented next year. But the discussion points that our committee discussed are the points that I want to make with this slide. So again, they saw a need to assess and clean the pipe system. They saw a need for about $100,000 in repairs in 2020, with an increase to $250,000 in maintenance repairs from 2021 to 2023. And they encouraged staff to continue to seek grant funding sources for system improvements, mainly our Chesapeake Bay Pollutant Reduction Plan BMPs. And I'm happy to say that we only have 1 or 2 best management practices that we've implemented so far that we have not received grant funds for. We actually have 2 projects in the pipeline right now. One will be constructed here in July of this year. One we just found out over Christmas and New Year's that we received DEP funding for. But nonetheless, our committee did encourage us to continue to seek grant funding for our projects. They also encouraged us to monitor and plan for changes that may be associated with an updated MS4 permit. And during our public meetings, we made sure that we always discussed that the funding that we need for our utility is constant. It'll be forever, regardless of any MS4 permit requirements. And as much as possible and when necessary, they encouraged us to implement incremental increases to the program. So all said and done, the budget amounts you can see to the right in 2020, from 2020 to 2023, our budget needs range from $1 million to $1.8 million. So just 2 more slides. Whenever they discussed, the one other important point that I wanted to mention about our mapping, whenever we hired the contractor to do the aerial photography, the end product was, of course, the digitization of the impervious coverage of that photography. And we found that the average square footage for single-family residential properties was 2,920 square feet. And that is ultimately the number that we're going to use for 1 ERU, for 1 equivalent residential unit. Whenever we started talking about the different types of residential classifications, this was a learning experience for me. But between the 3 classifications that are all single-family residential, single-family attached, single-family detached, and single-family detached or semi-detached dwellings, all of those residential classifications will be based on 1 ERU, regardless of the impervious coverage. So we could, for example, have an attached dwelling that has 5,000 square feet of impervious. even though it's much higher than the 2,920 average square footage of a single family residential property, they're being charged $1. The intent, I should say, is for them to be charged 1 ERU or $5 a month. On the contrary to that, a small semi-detached dwelling could have 500 square feet of impervious. They will also be charged 1 ERU, even though they are significantly under that average square footage of a single family residential property. So the next 5 classifications there: 2-family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, garden apartment buildings, multiple residential buildings on one lot, and residential commercial mixed use. They will all be charged impervious fee structures, or a multiplier of the square footage. So for example, the picture there of the garden apartment building, that's equivalent to 20 single-family residential properties, so they will be charged based on the square footage of impervious. So in that example, there's approximately 58,400 square feet of impervious area. They will be charged 20 ERUs, or $100 a month. And finally, in the example of an office building, a restaurant, a warehouse, this is a pretty typical setup for buildings throughout Chambersburg, where you have an office building, associated drive lanes and parking. There may be a stormwater management facility at the front or in the back. This type of property, that would be equivalent to about 35,000 square feet of impervious area, which would be 12 ERUs. So this particular property would be charged about $60 per month, or $720 per year. This same property currently is paying $5 per month. So again, this is what we're doing here in Chambersburg. I know it's probably a little bit different than some other municipalities, or maybe it's very similar to what other municipalities are doing. I think we're all here, trying to achieve the same goals with maintaining MS4 permit compliance, and we're all trying to implement our Chesapeake Bay plans in order to reduce our nutrients going to the bay. With that, I will offer time to answer any questions if we have time.
Great, thanks, Andy. We have about 3 minutes before our session is supposed to end. If anyone has questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And while they're doing that, I have a couple questions that I'd like to ask you. And I may have missed it, hopefully not, but do you have an appeals process, and is there a credit process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did not highlight anything on appeals or credits, and that's another part of the process that we're in the middle of now. We will have a credit policy manual. There's been a lot of discussion about, I should say there was a lot of discussion about that, and our hope is to keep it fairly simple. But again, we're not entirely sure about what types of credits will be available. We're in the middle of that now. But I will say that we've had a lot of recent dialogue here internally that we hope to encourage property owners to allow us to construct Bay BMP projects on their properties. So we've been talking a lot about that particular, to be able to provide credits for that particular item if a property owner is willing to allow us to construct BMPs on their property.
Oh, that's
great.
There
will also be an appeal process as well.
Nice. So we have a question in the chat. What's your #1 stormwater goal for your municipality this year in an ideal scenario?
What is our #1 stormwater goal?
Right. It's like, maybe, is it, getting another project built? Is it, working? I think that's probably what it is project wise. I'm assuming. Yeah, Caitlin, if you want to clarify.
Sure. I'd say to try to be in a position where we can adopt over to our new fee structure. We've spent a lot of man hours going through the data collection. The data collection in itself took 3 staff members, probably 3 months in order to compile all the data. We looked at, I don't know how many thousands of properties, probably 12 to 15,000 properties individually in order to gather the impervious data. So that's probably my primary goal right now, is to get ourselves in a position where we can present that to our town council with the hope of changing over to the new fee structure at some time next year.
So Andy, one real quick one before we have to go in 1 minute. I'm curious about the outreach that you've been doing beyond the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Have you been working with citizens to kind of prepare them for what this shift is going to mean and starting to pre-educate them?
Yeah, we have. In fact, at the conclusion of our stakeholder meetings in August of 2019, actually in September of 2019, we had 3 consecutive public meetings. The first public meeting was for the general public. So if you live or work in Chambersburg, you were invited to that meeting. And we basically discussed the whole process, where we felt as though the fee structure was going. It was a very well attended meeting. And the second and third meetings were more focus group oriented. For example, the second meeting, I believe we targeted the highest ratepayers in the boroughs. For example, the school district and our hospital, the larger businesses, because essentially they will be the ones that are impacted the greatest once our new fee structure goes into effect. And the final third public meeting was catered towards the nonprofit organizations such as schools and churches and other organizations, the YMCA, organizations like that. So great question, but yes, we did conduct a significant amount of outreach as a result of our stakeholder meetings and our plan to move forward with a new fee structure.
Well, we would like to wish you good luck with the switch and the transition to that new fee structure. We wish you the best. And thank you so much for your time today and sharing your experience with us. If everyone could use your applause emoji to give Andy a little appreciation for his time today and the great information. So folks, just a reminder to hit the leave button and use your agenda to go back to the day 2 link, and we'll queue up the next set of breakout sessions. Thanks so much, Andy. Thanks, everybody. See you in another session.